of clips of the mainstream media, some from today after the 2020 election and others from back in 2006 when Democrats and the left-wing media actually claimed that voting fraud was a national security issue. See for yourselves.
Dominion has absolutely no corporate ties with George Soros or Venezuela. But that's not stopping Trump campaign attorney Sidney Powell from making the wild and totally unfounded claim that Dominion is somehow tied to Hugo Chavez.
The U.S. company that makes the machines, Sequoia, was bought in 2005 by Smartmatic, a private company primarily owned by Venezuelan businessmen.
It's an obvious play from, Dirty Politics 101. I mean, Hugo Chavez, really? That's what we're going to talk about?
That's right.
That was the most ridiculous thing. That we were in the realm of ridiculousness.
When Chicago had problems with the machines, a dozen Venezuelan employees were there to help with the election. Chicago officials are outraged.
I think that American elections ought to be run by American companies and ought to be run by American citizens, not Venezuelan nationals.
It's frankly, it's just crazy stuff, tinfoil hat stuff. But the idea is that because of the software, somebody is able to go in and change the results. If somebody even wanted to do that, could they do that?
You really can't miss it. The yellow button at the back of the Sequoia voting machine. Tens of thousands of machines used in 16 states and Washington, D.C. That button puts the machine in manual mode, so anyone can vote and repeatedly cast as many votes as they want.
A company that has close ties with Venezuela and therefore China?
False. Truth, facts, they don't seem to matter to Giuliani.
Fewer than a dozen Smartmatic employees work in Florida. The majority of the workers are based in Venezuela. Watchdog groups question why U.S. voting machines would be under the control of citizens of another country, especially a country whose own election process is highly suspect.
We believe this is a national security issue. There is no way that companies belonging to non-U.S. corporations should have access to our elections.
When you hear the president, and I would put your politics completely out of this for a second, but I will bring it up in a moment for one reason. But poll workers in Michigan duplicating ballots, jumping in front to block results. What do you even say to that?
I worry about the poll captains having access. They're temporary workers. In many cases, there aren't background checks done on them, and it's easy for them to go back there, make those changes, and vote repeatedly and not be noticed.
This is why the mainstream media can't be trusted, and why, if you're listening to them, you're intentionally being misled. So quickly, let's do a tally of the mainstream media's hypocrisy on voting fraud. Today, they're telling us that our voting machines have no ties with Venezuela. But just a few years ago, these same people said our voting machines were, quote, bought by Smartmatic, which is primarily owned by Venezuelan businessmen. Today, it's in the realm of ridiculousness to say that Hugo Chavez could ever have anything to do with our voting machines. But jump back again, and they literally said these are the same machines used by Hugo Chavez in his elections. Now, the mainstream media says, quote, it's a tinfoil hat theory for someone to believe that it's possible to change the results of an election. And once again, barely a decade ago, they told us that by just pressing a button on the back of the machines, literally anyone could vote as many times as they wanted. Now, they call this a conspiracy theory, but back then, they called it a national security issue. This is a 2016 headline straight from leftist news rag Politico called How to Hack an Election in 7 Minutes, which they say is nothing more than child's play. And then, here's a headline from today calling voting fraud a crazy and confoundingly successful conspiracy theory. Obviously, they don't read their own headlines. It should be clear by now that the mainstream media has no intention of telling you the truth and just want to convince you of their version of events. However, One American News believes the American people have a right to know what's happening. But the only problem is every time we do, we get fact-checked by people with alternative facts. That doesn't matter. This is too important to give up on because the fate of an election and an entire country hangs in the balance. For One American News, I'm Pearson Sharp.